This podcast contains content that is graphic in nature and mature language that may be unsuitable for children or young listeners. Listener discretion is advised. In the early morning hours of August 28, 2013, a young man hanging out with some friends outside of his home in Vidalia, Louisiana, was shot point blank in the chest. After being rushed to the hospital, he passed away from this single gunshot wound about an hour later. Law enforcement easily located the suspect and arrested him within a short time, but the reason for taking a life so abruptly is still in question to this day. Come with us as we mull over the details in today's case on this episode of Sin Law. Hey guys, welcome to our episode. This is Kelly.
And Kyler.
And I don't know why I sounded like that. Sounds weird. I feel weird every time we do those. Yeah. I don't know why I can't just do it the same way, but it's always a thing. All right, we ready for a full episode?
No.
Not really, no.
She wasn't ready.
If you guys didn't listen to the last bonus episode, y'all are killing it and have continued to kill it. I put up a couple videos on TikTok. They blew up too. Like, I say blew up. I feel like they blew up. I'm not going to talk about numbers. Whatever. You guys are awesome is all I'm trying to say. The case today, we're just going to get right into it because, I don't like to leave a lot of fluff in the beginning. Today's case is going to be centered in Vidalia, as I said in the intro. A couple of things about Vidalia. It was actually established in 1820. And it's seated right on the border on the Mississippi River. So its closest neighbor to the east is Natchez, Mississippi. And you probably have that feel already if you've listened to any of our other episodes that have anything to do with our area over here. Because, we talk a lot about whether it be like Marvin Watson, he drove across the bridge and turned himself into an attorney in Natchez. I believe the update we just did about Jordan Johnson, he drove across the bridge and got caught in apartments in Natchez. Mm-hmm. So it's a fan favorite.
It's one of the closest larger cities.
Right. So you can kind of like jump across the bridge and get lost over there.
Well, that's the hope, but I think it's more so just the closest larger city that's not in the same state they did the crime in.
Right.
Seems like a good idea.
I can understand, yeah. And a lot of people, they go back and forth between the two too. So they come over here to hang out or do whatever. Us from over here go to Mississippi because they have that whole river, like downtown Natchez, kind of like touristy feel. So we'll be in Vidalia though today, and this case is from 2013. And this was actually a listener recommendation as well, and you guys have heard her name before if you've listened to any other episodes. What's up, Nakia? How you doing? You're welcome.
She means to say thank you.
That's what I said. So, like I said, we're in Vidalia, and this is on August 28th, somewhere around midnight-ish, and we've got Derek. He went by Beede. Dobbins. He's 24 years old. He was known to enjoy hunting and fishing, and according to an article by the Concordia Sentinel, he was described as a big, jolly guy.
B.D. Dobbins, like B.R. Robbins.
Kind of. And they do a lot of nicknaming,
No, I was just saying he likes Baskin Robbins.
In this story specifically is all I meant. Yes, I get it. Big, jolly guy, likes Baskin Robbins ice cream. Okay, got it. All right, so 24-year-old Beede is hanging out with 5 of his friends outside. It didn't say specifically whose house it was. I believe it's either Beede's or his sister's, but
I got to get it out before it bothers me. Beede juice.
Okay. Well done. Well played. So they're hanging out outside. So there's 6 of them total, Beede and his 5 friends. 3 of the friends go to do a beer run right before this incident occurs, and so Beede's there sitting on the tailgate of a truck outside the house with 2 brothers. That would be Tommy Duck, like Quack Quack Duck, and Justin Rogers. So they're all hanging out, sitting around, and then shortly after the 3 guys left to do the beer run.
I thought they were brothers.
What?
Tommy Duck and Justin Rogers.
It doesn't matter if they can be brothers and have 2 different daddies. Don't be judgmental. All right. So.
Real.
So.
And we're walking.
So, a little bit after the three guys left to do the bear run, another gentleman named Vincent Dotson, he went by Hustler, or that's what people knew him by, was Hustler.
That's a horrible nickname.
21 years old, he came walking up the street, and when Beede saw him approaching, he like waved him down and was like, hey man, come talk to me. Hey man, come talk. And so Hustler, he approached the truck and started speaking to Beede, who began asking him questions like, hey man, why don't you like me? Like, what did I do to you? And from the way it read, it sounded like Beede was well into his, what do they call it? Well into his bottle? Yeah. And he was just kind of like, hey man, why do you like me? Like, and, according to court documents, the two had, prior to this, had an event or an issue with each other, and all it said was over a dog, or it involved a dog, and that it was a, quote, old incident. So I couldn't find anything else on that. I have no other details, which sucks, but they had some kind of prior run-in. So that's kind of where Beede was like, why don't you like me? Like, what's wrong? What's going on? They didn't really, they had a few words back and forth, but it wasn't really anything crazy. Like, they didn't get loud. They didn't yell at each other. No aggressive movements, nothing like that. But,
it takes a certain kind of drunk to get mad drunk.
Right. It does. And it doesn't sound like that to me. It sounds literally just, kind of good-hearted. Like, can we bury this? Can we be done?
Yeah.
Hustler turned and began to walk away, but Beede was persistent. He kept asking, like, come on, man, like, what, just tell me what's wrong. Like, tell me how we can fix it. And Dodson just ignored him and just kind of kept walking away. And finally, Beede came out with sort of, one of those drunk asshole-y questions, like kind of being a smart ass, like, what, do you want me to hug your little ass or something? And when he said that, witnesses, the two brothers, they said that Dodson just stopped cold. Like, almost mid-step, just stopped. And turned around in one fluid motion, stuck one hand inside of his pocket, went to rub his hand across the top of his head, pulled out the gun, shot him once in the chest. Less than a second later, he took off the other direction. So, having only fired one shot, never said a word, never said anything else, just took off running. The two friends, obviously, they heard the shot. It probably ricocheted, echoed off of every single house at a mile's range because it was after midnight and it was very quiet. And so after Beede received the shot to the chest, he turned around, took 2 or 3 stumbling steps, and then collapsed in the street. And at that point, Duck ran to get Beede's sister from inside the house, and Rogers got his phone out and called 911. When the sister got outside, she immediately started CPR while they were waiting on the first responders to get there. Now, a little bit of a side note, Duck actually had warrants out for his arrest, so initially he kind of fibs to...
Duck.
Yeah. Rogers, since he's on the phone with 911, and when the cops show up, he's still present. He said something about, his friend. He didn't call him his brother, but his friend was in the bathroom or something. And, they eventually found Duck hiding in the bushes. He was afraid he was going to get picked up on his warrant, so he was trying to avoid that whole situation. But anyway, that just a side note, because I think it comes up in the trial later about him being a liar. So they're waiting on first responders to get there. And while that's happening, Sergeant Heath Edwards of the Vidalia Police Department, he received a call at approximately midnight 17 about the shooting, and he left in his patrol car to the address that was given. And approaching the scene, he recognized... Oh, no, I guess he did see Duck. Duck was still there at this point. So he recognized Duck, and maybe it was Rogers who had the warrant then. He called 911 and then bolted. That's probably what happened. Okay, anyway, one of them lied. One of them had a warrant. So, anyway, Sergeant
Edwards...
Edwards...
lie, they would have to talk to them, so he was probably the one that called.
Right, and that's my thing. It's like, they both... I guess one of them has to lie and say that he's not there, or that whatever. Or that he had left the scene, or something.
They don't have
either
to
way,
say anything about him.
Either way, doesn't matter. Regardless, you guys get the point. One of them lied. It was brought up in court later. when Sergeant Edwards approached the scene, he saw Duck, recognized him because, they're all from the same kind of area and you get to know people. And Duck flagged him down to where Beede was still laying in the street with his sister still trying to give him CPR and render, that life-saving efforts. And then the sergeant, as he approached, he noted a gunshot wound on the left side of the victim's chest, and also after reaching down and touching the victim, he realized that there was no pulse. So,
good fucking shot.
Yeah. And at this point, Duck relayed that he had witnessed the entire event. He saw everything, and he told him that Hustler, Dotson, and Beede had been arguing, and that Dotson had pulled a gun, fired once, shot him, and fled. So, not too long after that, an ambulance and more law enforcement showed up, and the victim was transferred to Natchez Regional Hospital. Upon arrival, the coroner of Adams County, Mississippi, pronounced him dead. So,
it doesn't help that he was drinking either. The blood loss.
Right. It's going to be a little bit thinner. So,
I mean, if he's well into his bottle, it's going to be more than a little bit thinner.
Right. I don't know how long they were been drinking. I think one of the testimonies read something like they'd been drinking since like 6 or 7 that evening. I don't know for sure. But he was pronounced dead at 1:12 a.m. And back at the scene, Captain Walter Williams of the Vidalia Police Department, he arrived around the same time as the ambulance, and he recognized the victim because, like I said, you get to know people. And he also testified later in court that Beede, quote, was a nice young man known by his friends as a fisherman, hunter, and outdoorsman who always wore camouflage gear, unquote. But everything I read about Beede was that he was, generally just a good-hearted, good old boy. That's what it sounded like. And not in any bad connotation, because I know that can be both. So, it was unknown at the time, but according to an article by the Concordia Sentinel, which will be linked in the show notes below, Dodson had gone to Faraday to turn himself in. So when Hustler took off on foot, he ended up going all the way back to Faraday to see if he could turn himself into a Faraday Police Department officer named Ricky Hollins. But Mr. Hollins wasn't home, and later another witness had identified Dodson walking down the street and picked him up in the car and then drove him to, I think it was like a gas station or something, and taken him to meet more of his family, where he switched cars, got into the car with his family. And there was also another family member that had pulled up in a vehicle. And about that time, they saw a police SUV or something pull into the parking lot, so they closed the door, took off real quick, which was not suspicious at all. And then just like spun tires getting out of it.
Tried to do the hustler switcheroo.
Right. So anyway, they take off real quick. Cop thinks this is suspicious, and he takes off after him, right? And he follows the suspect vehicle because, he can tell that there's more in the one, or maybe he even saw them. That wasn't clear, but he did end up following the vehicle that actually had.
So, moral of the story, if and when you do something wrong, don't be suspicious.
Yeah, don't be suspicious. Okay. Exactly. But, I feel like they still would have pulled up, but just because. Anyway, so they take off. They're in a chase now at this point. So, but the cops followed him, like I said, that vehicle, and then they called for backup. So they ended up having 3 or 4, maybe even 5 vehicles following this vehicle during different points of the chase. They take off on this, I don't want to call it a high-speed chase because I don't think that was the case, but they did take off on a chase after this vehicle.
A moderate pursuit.
There you go. And once he, realized that they weren't going to stop with his lights on, he called in for backup, like I said, and so they had multiple cars. Well, during this chase, and there are articles in the show notes that, if you want to read about this part of it, Dotson's father, whose name is Vince Bates, at the time, he was an 8-year veteran of the Natchez Police Department. He had pulled his vehicle so close to the rear of one of the police cruisers that were pursuing his son that the officer inside testified later that he could not see his headlights. So he had to have been pretty damn close to that car while they were in pursuit. So anyway, that's just an interesting tidbit, and he did get charges put on him later for those things. So eventually the driver of the suspect car went through a ditch trying to go around another officer vehicle and ended the chase by getting blocked in by yet another officer's car on the outskirts of Vidalia. So once they got the car locked in the ditch, they got the two other passengers, a driver and a passenger, out of the vehicle at gunpoint, but Dodson, like, crawls into, like, a corner cubby at the back, locks all the doors, and refuses to get out of the car. So, exactly. Just kind of, like, just give it up at that point. You're kind of fucked, like, you're surrounded. Anyway, so they eventually get him out, get him in handcuffs, take him back to the station, so.
What the fuck are you running from, kid?
Yeah, well, his dad, he later also got put on administrative leave and was eventually charged with accessory after the fact, second-degree murder. But on November 20th, 2013, from the court records I could locate, that charge was expunged. And the only thing that shows on his record now is the misdemeanor charge of reckless operation. So,
pays to be blue.
Well, kinda, yeah. And you have to have a certain degree of understandable, like, reasoning, because that's his son. No matter what he did.
I understand him. It was still against the law, though.
No, absolutely. And he should have known that as an officer, so I get it. And I understand why they let him expunge it.
That would have done the same thing, if not more.
Right.
I would have been charged.
Right. Yeah, well, he was charged. He just had it expunged after the fact.
I would have been convicted.
He was. He just had it expunged after the fact. So anyway, let's get back to the case. What happened after they eventually got 21-year-old Vincent Hustler Dotson? He never made a statement. He never gave them anything. He shut down. Like we tell everybody who listens to this podcast, keep your mouth shut. I want to speak with my attorney. That's it. That's all you need to say. So back at the scene, they found no blood evidence. There were no shell casings, which officers said was indicative of the murder weapon, which we well know at this point being a revolver, if they can't find any shell casings, especially in the situation because there were eyewitness says he shot him and then took off, like in the same fluid motion. So he didn't stop and pick up any shell casings. So reasonable assumption to make is that it was a revolver. And since there was no noted exit wound on the victim, this accounted for the lack of blood loss. So everything was contained within his body. And according to court records, they never actually recovered the actual murder weapon.
That's curious. I wonder what kind it was, because with it being a revolver, you would think that it would have had enough power to push through.
You would think. So we'll get there in a second. We're almost there. So from the time of the arrest on August 29th, 2013, it took over a year to start the trial. Jury selection began on October 27th of 2014. And opening statements by District Attorney Brad Burgett and Public Defender William Yarborough stated that jury selection started on the 27th. Opening statements started the morning of October 28th in front of Honorable Judge Leo Booth. So, multiple witnesses were called for the state, starting with Lisa Fuente, the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner for Mississippi. Why. Probably, because I've also been singing Encanto in my head for the last 6 hours. So, she was the medical examiner for Mississippi.
Thank you for keeping it up there.
For Mississippi. She performed the autopsy because they did take him to Natchez, remember, for when they initially took him to the hospital after the ambulance left. They found that the manner of death was homicide from a gunshot wound to the chest and testified that she removed one bullet during the autopsy. And
that would make sense.
Guess who is our expert for the firearms? Mike Stelly.
I wanted to say Stelly.
Anyway, he also got on the stand and testified that the bullet that was recovered from the body was either a .38 or .357 Magnum caliber bullet, and was identified that the potential weapon was most likely a Smith & Wesson or a Taurus revolver. So the brother witnesses that I spoke about earlier, Tommy Duck and Justin Rogers, they both testified to the incident as eyewitnesses for the state. They both testified that the gun was a .38 revolver and that they had seen Dodson carrying it in a red-orange Nike bag, and it was nearly almost always in his pocket whenever they interacted with him, and they did on a pretty frequent basis. They said that he always had it, and he had a weird habit of, like, taking it out and playing with it, like, in front of people. Rogers...
Snub.
Yeah, probably. That would explain the force.
Power loss,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Rogers' testimony stated that most of the time Dodson was, quote, cool, but, quote, most of the time he just pops up looking crazy, unquote. Duck also said that
How are those both most of the times?
Right. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So Duck also said that he thought Dotson was potentially dangerous and paranoid on his, quote, weird days. That Dotson would, quote, stare at people and play with his little gun, unquote. Which, all I could see in my head was a different, like, so a 21-year-old young adult version of Dr. Evil with a cat, but with his little gun. He's just kind of stroking that's all I could see in my head when I read that.
I went straight to Elmer Fudd.
Oh, no, he's got a shotgun. That's not the same thing. Anyway, Rogers further testified about the murder that they, Dodson and Dobbins, did not argue so much, but Hustler and Beede, then, they didn't argue per se, that neither of them raised their voices, nor did they even touch each other, and that Dodson never said a word to anyone aside from the victim. And
what did you say to him? We didn't mention that earlier.
No, I did. I said that they had words back and forth. When he went to leave and Beede was still trying to engage with him, he didn't say a word.
Okay.
Yeah. So Rogers didn't talk to the officers at the scene. So I did put the whole part of it in here in my notes. I didn't get that far earlier when I was reviewing. But it was Rogers. He didn't talk to them at the scene because he hid in the bushes because of his warrant. So he said that when he left the scene, he ran into his family, or he ran into Dotson's family, and he was the one who told them about what was going on. So that's how they knew and went out looking for him, trying to pick him up. Yeah. When Rogers told them that he had witnessed Hustler shoot Beede, that's when they took off. And later, when he did give the police an interview, warrants be damned, that's how he ended up testifying at trial. But they did kind of make a big deal about the fact that he was a known liar, or that was one of the defense tactics, I guess, was to try to make it look like he was not a believable witness, which is really all you can do, especially in a situation like this when you've got two people that are literally standing within a couple yards or so of what actually happened. That's the best that your lawyer is going to be able to do, because one eyewitness is not very convincing, because we know how unreliable eyewitness testimony can be,
especially with a group of friends.
Absolutely, especially if they're drinking. But if you have two, that's even better. If you have three or more, the more you have to corroborate and they come up with the same story, that just makes it more reliable and believable.
The more to cooperate, the easier to corroborate.
That's right. So after all of this, all of the testimony, it was only a 2-day trial, and the jury was excused for deliberation at 4:09 and returned at 4:38. So literally less than 30 minutes. And they had a unanimous verdict of guilty of second-degree murder. He was later sentenced at a different time for mandatory life without parole, no benefits. And then he moved on to his appeal phase. They appealed his conviction in 2016, which is where I got the majority of the information and details for this episode. As you'll see in the show notes, if you look through the source material, there wasn't a whole lot. I think I've got 3, maybe 4 articles total, and they weren't top headlines like some of the cases that we do. Some of them were on the first page. Other updates about the trial or what have you were deeper into the newspaper. Just their significance wasn't up there very high. And when I saw the appeal, they had a lot of information in there that, a lot of the quotes and stuff that I used, that's what they came from. And they affirmed all of the trial court's decisions, stating that the undisputed and uncontested evidence showed that the defendant aimed a loaded revolver at the victim and shot him without provocation. Because I think one of the assignments of error that the appellate attorneys tried to argue was that he didn't have a motive, or he didn't go in there with intent to kill. Right. But they're saying he took out a gun, shot at his chest, and then how did he expect him not to be dead? That
I didn't know I was that good of a shot, man.
And that shows the intent just in the action. So anyway, that's what they said. And now he also had his appellate attorney file a writ with the Supreme Court to motion for a new trial, but that was denied in 2017. So one of the biggest things, and when Nikita brought me this case and told me to look into it and do an episode, because she knows I will, because I love her and she gives me great cases. But that's great, because I like having somebody that I can come around and be like, I remember when this happened. Do you think you could? Yeah, right. Love it. I love it because she's got a little bit of firsthand knowledge and she's been around, so she knows the interesting cases. Because the ones that caught people's attention that they still remember years later are the ones that I like to cover. And her biggest question to me was see if you can find out why. Why did he just shoot him? Why did that occur? Mm-hmm. And Well, the DA, Brad Burgett, he actually said in the court, he said in trial, he said, this is not, I think it was in his opening statement, he said, quote, "This is not a whodunit. We know who did it. The question is, and will remain to be, and is still unclear, is
why
why.
done it.
Yeah. So it's a why because the best that anybody can assume or figure, because he never gave a statement, like I said, maybe he told his attorney, but I doubt it. My biggest thing when I was reading through all of this is it seemed like there was something off, and with that I mean his mental level or mental processing. Something seemed like he was just like, I saw a lot of quotes about him being weird, about him being a little off-putting, the way that he was about his gun, and it seemed like there was something maybe not allowing him to think in a proper process. So it may very well be that the comment, "Oh, you want me to hug your little ass" or something, offended him to a point where he was like, "Oh, you're going to talk down to me," and that was just his reaction. But I still can't see that as being the only thing. Now, we know that he had the prior incident, whatever that was, about the dog. I don't know how, heated that situation got or what exactly occurred, because I don't have that information. I tried as hard as I could.
Dog, we just don't know.
Right, and so there's no way for us to know for sure if that actually played into it at all, or if that was what he was holding the grudge over, or if it was just he woke up that morning and chose violence. I don't know, and neither could anybody else find out. So with all the people that they talked to, and with all of the people who knew of them and knew to run in the same circles as they did, nobody could give a good answer or definitive answer that would even make sense, because to all of the information that I gathered, it came to the same conclusion that Beede wasn't that guy. He wasn't the one to provoke or prod or try to make a situation aggressive or anything like that. And he was a bigger guy from what I understand. And maybe it was like a little man syndrome, but there's no way of knowing. Like, we can sit here all day and make guesses about what it possibly could have been, but the only person that knows why he shot him is Vincent Dotson. So, right. And as of this recording, he is currently 30 years old. He's serving his time at the Elaine Hunt Correctional Facility, and he has exhausted all of his appeals, so that'll be his forever home. And that's where it's at. I mean, like, it's really sad, and it really sucks that, a guy, he sounded like he was being a dingy drunk. They sitting out there having a good time, just kind of powwowing, and then he ends up dead. And maybe something like that, or that kind of situation was inevitable for someone that interacted with Vincent Dotson, because it seemed like it obviously it didn't take much. There wasn't any kind of physical altercation, or he didn't even slight him by bumping into him or anything. It wasn't anything like that. Right. So it seems like a gross overreaction to a situation that I can't see how it became. That people say it a lot. 0 to 60 in it was like 0 to 60 in 0.0001 seconds, and it's just mind blowing. The whole thing is mind blowing. And then the dad that ends up, he catches charges too for this entire situation. All of it was just crazy. It seemed a lot for nothing, for something so slight. And that's why I tell people all the time, like, this shit can happen anywhere, to anyone, at any time, because you never know. You never know what's going on in somebody's head. You never know how they're going to react, and it's one of those things that it always worries me a little bit, going out into the world. Right. Yeah. But, I mean, and then you have, the opposite effect of that, too, where, you have your faith restored in humanity at times. But those are few and further between. So, that's all I got, though. That's it for this one. And I'm sorry, Nikita, that I couldn't answer your actual question as to why, because nobody fucking knows. Nobody knows. And unfortunately, sometimes that's the best answer we can give, is that we don't know. Because I don't know if that's always a bad thing. Because if we can get inside the head of people that do things like this for seemingly absolutely zero reason, then maybe we need to seek professional help, because there is no reason for this. And, you know, unfortunately, Beede seemed like a really great guy from everything that I gathered and all the articles, and y'all can read them for yourselves. For Derek Dobbins, he was only 24 years old, so if nothing else, it's a tragic loss of 2 lives. You know, they didn't even reach their mid-20s, because, you know, Vincent Dotson, he was only 21 at the time, and he'll be in jail for the rest of his natural life. And that's just, I mean, it's terrible on both cases. He basically lost his life too, but, you know, he made that choice, and that was something, and you know, Derek, he didn't. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for tuning in again. Appreciate all the likes and follows. And we actually, on the next bonus episode, I've got very short, but like one is very confusing, but I've got a couple comments that got put on the YouTube videos that I'm going to cover on the next bonus episode that should be coming out either Monday, Tuesday next week. So make sure you guys give that a listen. Follow us on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube. You can subscribe and get alerts every time a new episode comes up. Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Leave us a rating and a review, please and thank you, because I see you guys return visitors, but I don't see y'all's reviews, and I love you. Thank you. Y'all are awesome. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, and of course any recommendations for an episode, we love to get them. So you guys have a great rest of your week. And a wonderful Thanksgiving, because that's on Thursday. And don't die on Black Friday. No deal is worth it.
Also, don't die on Thanksgiving. No turkey is worth it.
I don't know. Some of them turkeys, though. Y'all have a great week and happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next week. Take care out there.
We'll see you next week. We better.
Bye.
Leave a review.
Bye. That too.
This has been an Elf Audio production.